It was late at night, and Julius Caesar was hard at work. A few weeks previous, he had won a crushing victory against his enemy Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus in the Roman Civil War. He had pursued Pompey here to Egypt, only to find that the local rulers had killed him. Caesar was grieved at this. He had hoped to forgive Pompey and to use him as a mouthpiece to tell the other rebels to lay down their arms. Now that door was shut to him. And now here he was in Alexandria, trying to salvage the situation. Alexandria was as perplexing as it was intoxicating. This was a city of beautiful, shining white marble. For a man as intelligent and curious as Julius Caesar was, it provided endless stimulation. It had the world's greatest library and museum, the world's oldest monuments, one of the world's great wonders in the Great Lighthouse of Alexandria. It had more than 400 theaters in which he could watch Greek tragedies and comedies. And yet, for all its beauty and erudition, it was in some ways the most backwards country in the world. This land of enlightenment was seemingly ruled by the most despotic and pig-headed dynasty one could imagine. Caesar could command entire countries, but he could not get two squabbling siblings to set aside their rivalry for the good of their country. Despite his explicit commands, the two still fielded armies against one another. He now resided in the palace complex with the boy Ptolemy. But he had not been able to so much as get a message to the boy's 20-year-old sister and ostensible co-ruler, Cleopatra. And so Caesar toiled away, issuing commands, hiring informants, holding court. It was late now, but Caesar continued to read and write. Messengers, scribes, and servants came and went. Caesar didn't take much notice of them. He didn't take much notice when one man came in carrying a particularly large linen bag. But now the man came directly to him and set the bag before his desk. Finally, Caesar set down the scroll he was reading and looked down at the freshly delivered bag. And what should emerge from it but a girl? Her clothing was rumpled but regal. She took the time to smooth her tunic and adjust her diadem. Her bearing was unmistakable. A bemused look spread across Caesar's face. A wolfish grin graced hers. She addressed him in flawless Greek. Gaius Julius Caesar, I presume. My name is Cleopatra.
I'm gonna show you how great I am.
This was our tiny tower.
I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody.
Hello, and welcome to How to Take Over the World. This is Ben Wilson, and today we are talking about Cleopatra. The story of Cleopatra is one of my favorite of all time. It's a story of intrigue. It's a very old story, very foreign in many ways, in terms of their ancient way of thinking, their morality, their way of life. And yet, in many of its details, it is shockingly modern. And sometimes with some of these old stories, it can seem a little bit like, okay, does Genghis Khan really make a great life coach? Do I really want to emulate Alexander the Great? Is that something that I can actually relate to what I'm trying to do today? But with Cleopatra, I think it's actually a little easier. This is someone who was not herself a warrior, and yet acquired and expanded a vast kingdom. She was a great diplomat, a great politician, a great leader. And I do think that there are a lot of leadership lessons to be learned from her. And if nothing else, I think it's an incredibly motivating, inspirational story. I'm reminded of a passage from Nietzsche, from Thus Spake Zarathustra. He says, "It is not your sin, but your sufficiency that cries out unto heaven. The meanness that is even in your sin cries out unto heaven. Where is the lightning to lick you with its tongue? Where is the madness to afford you protection?" And I like that. Like, so much of contemporary modern life is just so dull and boring. We're not motivated by our ambition and our passions in quite the same way. And Cleopatra's life is dramatic, it's flamboyant, it's extravagant in both its ambition and its tragedy. And if nothing else, I think it inspires me to live a more full and adventurous life. And I do think that there are also concrete lessons from the way she approached strategy and diplomacy. So with all that said, please enjoy this, part 1 on the life of Cleopatra. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC, and she was born to the Ptolemaic dynasty, which means she is a great-great-great-granddaughter of Ptolemy. So as a reminder of who that is, he is a friend of Alexander the Great. Both of them are Macedonian Greeks. Alexander conquers the entire Persian Empire, and then he dies suddenly, and his top generals divide the empire among themselves and establish a number of successor kingdoms. And one of these generals was a childhood friend of Alexander named Ptolemy. He takes Egypt because it is very wealthy and very easy to defend. And when Alexander's body is on the way back to Macedonia from Babylon, where he dies, Ptolemy whisks away the body, basically steals it, and takes it to Egypt. Specifically, he takes it to this new capital city, Alexandria, which is named Alexandria after Alexander the Great, because Alexander established it. Supposedly, he personally chose the site and helped plan it out. And this gives Ptolemy quite a bit of legitimacy. Look how close I am with Alexander. I am ruling from his city. I am the custodian of his very body. Now, the Ptolemies are interesting because they are a minority of a minority. Alexandria is basically founded as a Greek city. Alexander the Great establishes it, and then all these Greek merchants and settlers come to settle there and build out the city. But over time, the native Egyptians come to outnumber the Greeks, and it's a very cosmopolitan city, so there are others as well. By Cleopatra's time, the population of the city appears to be majority Egyptian, but just barely. And then it has quite a few Greeks, maybe like 25, 30% Greeks. It has the largest Jewish population outside of Jerusalem, and it also would have had smaller numbers of Romans, Phoenicians, Nabateans, Ethiopians, Berbers, you name it. It's a classic cosmopolitan city. In fact, arguably, it is the original cosmopolitan city. The word cosmopolitan having been coined by Diogenes around the same time of Alexandria's founding. So the Greeks are not the majority, but they are the founders of the city, and they run the city. It is a Greek city. And what kinds of Greeks? Well, merchants, entrepreneurs, the type of people who pick up and move to Egypt for a new opportunity. And notably, that does not describe Macedonians like Ptolemy and Alexander the Great, who are sort of barely Greek, kind of backcountry, rugged warriors. And so, like I said, the Ptolemies are a minority of a minority. They are a Macedonian minority of a Greek minority in the city of Alexandria, and this makes them very insular, okay? The effect is that the Ptolemies are like the most messed up family you will ever hear about. They are constantly both marrying and killing one another, okay? So they marry their siblings in order to keep this bloodline pure. It is descent from this ruler, Ptolemy, that legitimizes their rule and his connection to the legendary Alexander the Great. So, think about it. You marry someone else, now your son is only half Ptolemy, and the next generation is only a quarter, and the generation after that is only an eighth. That's more of a trivia fact than it is a biological reality, right? So they have this very inbred family tree. They're constantly marrying each other in order to stay pure Macedonian Greek, pure Ptolemy. They are also always killing each other, killing their children, killing their siblings, killing their parents, because the only people who can challenge them for the throne are other members of this highly incestuous family. So that is the thing to keep in mind about Ptolemies. They marry each other and they kill each other. They also rule Egypt as pharaohs. You have to imagine that the Greeks in Alexandria, probably slightly roll their eyes at this, but this is very important to the native Egyptians. They have a tradition of pharaohs having a divine right to rule Egypt going back thousands of years, before the Greeks are even a thing. So the Ptolemies, they wear the double crown with the cobra on it, they hold the staff, paint their eyes, they do the whole 9 yards. Even though they're descendants, not of the Egyptian pharaohs, but of Macedonian conquerors, they still pose as thoroughly Egyptian god kings. And by the way, pharaohs were also known to marry brother and sister, so that's another reason for the practice. It is traditional in Egypt. Two other things to know about Alexandria and the Ptolemies. Alexandria is the wealthiest, most beautiful, and most educated city in the world at the time. It is like the New York City of the Mediterranean world. Alexandrians consider it the center of the world. It has beautiful marble public buildings. It has the Library of Alexandria, which is by far the world's greatest repository of knowledge. There's like nothing even close. It has the Great Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the great wonders of the ancient world. It was genuinely a marvel to behold. And from all of this, this library, this museum, it becomes the intellectual and academic center of the world as well. So everyone from Rome to Greece to Africa to Syria, everywhere, everyone who has any money and any influence wants an Alexandrian tutor for their children, okay? It's like the Harvard of its time as well. So that's Alexandria. And then the second thing to know is that the Ptolemies are fabulously wealthy on a scale unparalleled in the world. All of this wealth and public building in Alexandria is financed by a few industries. The most important is grain. Okay, because of the Nile and its regular flooding, Egypt is the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. They ship grain everywhere. They are one of the few areas able to produce a surplus that can be exported. Okay, so it's really, most places grow grain but aren't fully able to feed themselves, and then it's Egypt that is making up the difference in shipping grain everywhere. That's the biggest industry. But there are other industries as well, including glass, papyrus, linen, oils, incense, shipbuilding, and more. And the Ptolemies exercise a royal monopoly over some of these industries and very heavily tax the others. And the result is that this one family represents something like a quarter of the GDP of all of Egypt. And remember, when I say family, this is not like a large extended family with a bunch of cousins. No, because of their sibling marriage, of this consanguinity, this basically remains one nuclear family throughout the generations. So they are worth the 21st century equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe trillions of dollars. So the Ptolemies have not only Egypt, but they have this little empire that includes the Eastern Mediterranean as well. Cyprus, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, other parts of North Africa, extending into modern Libya. This gets a little bit complicated by the expansion of a Western power that begins to dominate the entire region, and that is, of course, Rome. And as the Romans begin invading the Eastern Mediterranean, they inevitably encroach on the territory of the Ptolemies. And in fact, Crassus, who comes into play in the Julius Caesar story, if you want to learn more about Crassus, you can listen to my Caesar episodes. But this Roman Crassus proposes annexing Egypt as a Roman province, but it doesn't happen. And the problem for the Romans is that Egypt is actually too wealthy, all right? It's so rich that you can't entrust it to any one person, because then they would become too powerful. The whole idea of the Roman Republic is that we're holding each other in check. We are sharing power. And so for any one man to control all of that money and wealth coming out of Egypt is going to be problematic. So the decision is made to leave the Ptolemies in place as client kings who answer to Rome. But now the Ptolemies are in a precarious situation. So they have to spend all this money bribing Roman senators and sustaining a public relations campaign in Rome to make sure this continues to be a good idea. Leave the Ptolemies in place. They'll pay us some kickbacks to Rome as a whole. This is a good situation. So they're paying all this money, bribing, it's not just one or two powerful men, but they have to basically bribe the entire Senate in Rome. So it's very expensive. And Cleopatra's father, who is inevitably named Ptolemy, so I think he's Ptolemy the 13th. They're very uncreative with their names. All these Ptolemies, all these people from the Ptolemaic dynasty, all the men are named Ptolemy, and all the women are named either Cleopatra or Arsinoe. And there are a couple of exceptions, but really only a couple. They all have the same names. Okay. So Cleopatra's father, who is Ptolemy, raises taxes to pay for these bribes, which is very unpopular. And this gets him dethroned. He gets kicked out, and his oldest daughter, gets put on the throne. But, live by Rome, die by Rome. This guy Ptolemy is actually the 12th, okay? And he's called Auletes, meaning the flute player, okay? So Ptolemy the 12th runs basically the world's first get-rich-quick scheme. He raises all this money in Rome to be restored, saying, hey, once I'm back as the king and pharaoh of Egypt, everyone knows that Egypt is the wealthiest place in the world. I'm going to be able to pay all you guys back with insane interest once I'm king again. So he raises all this money. The Romans restore him, and he is a pro-Roman king of Egypt, but it's still problematic because raising that money is easier said than done. Like, yes, Egypt is extremely wealthy, but the coffers are empty because they've been paying all this money as bribes. And now they've gone through kind of a civil war, so a lot of money was spent there. So the native Egyptians are not happy that this guy they kicked out has been returned by the Romans to kind of subdue and be their king. And the Romans are not happy because they're not getting paid back in quite as timely a manner as they thought. All right. So this is the situation that Cleopatra grows up in. She receives a very Greek education, frankly, probably the best education in the world. Again, this is the place where everyone wants to be educated, and she's getting the not only in Alexandrian education, but like the best of the best, right? The best tutors in Alexandria are going to be the ones who are educating her. So she grows up very wealthy and very well educated. Her father dies in 51 BC when she is 18 years old, and she succeeds to the throne with her preteen brother, Ptolemy the 13th, who she is officially married to and who will rule jointly with her. Now, like I said, it is a kingdom in crisis, severely in debt to the Romans, in internal turmoil over the taxes that had been raised, and they've got this problem of rogue Roman soldiers roaming the countryside as bandits, because the Romans, when they brought back Cleopatra's father, they send over these soldiers to make sure he gets put in place, put on the throne. And then, like I said, he doesn't have the money to pay them back. So these Roman soldiers just set up camp in Egypt. They settle there and they're just like, all right, well, we'll take money where we can. All right, so there's a lot of turmoil in Egypt when Cleopatra ascends to the throne with her husband brother. Her first action taken as monarch is a bit of a misstep, or at least it's classically known as that. And what happens is some of these bandits get even more out of control than normal. They murder, they steal, and so she arrests them and ships them off to a nearby governor to be tried. And this upsets the Egyptians for kowtowing to Roman authority, especially the Greek Egyptians. Well, it also upsets the Romans for her high-handed treatment of Roman citizens. Even if you're a queen of Egypt, we Romans don't recognize the authority of anyone else to try and arrest Roman citizens other than Romans. So tough times for young Cleopatra. So historians take this on face value and say, what a misstep by Cleopatra. I actually think it may have been the optimal thing to do nevertheless, because yes, it kind of upsets everyone, but any other action would have severely upset someone else. So what are her other options? Okay, so she arrests them, but sends them to a Roman to be tried. Her other option is do what the natives want, which is try them and execute them herself, which would have had the Romans flying off the handle, right? I mean, if she had actually killed Roman citizens, well, then she might get overthrown by the Romans. Or she could have gone the opposite way, which is to say, done nothing at all, which again, might have got her dethroned. So it seems like a bad decision because it upsets everyone, but actually maybe it was a good decision because it's a compromise. It upsets everyone a little bit, but no one enough that they actually want to overthrow Cleopatra. So lesson number one, sometimes the compromise seems like a bad decision because no one likes it, but it's actually the optimal decision because no one hates it enough to actually take action against you. So that's kind of the first step. And then she has a fracture with her brother and a civil war begins between the two of them at the exact same time that a civil war is going on between Julius Caesar and Pompey in Rome. Reading between the lines, it seems that Cleopatra is something of a populist, all right? She was the first Egyptian monarch to actually learn to speak Egyptian, all right? Imagine that. For all the other Ptolemies, they thought, we speak Greek, that's enough. Alexandria is basically a Greek city, whatever. Cleopatra actually learns to speak Egyptian. Not only that, she goes up and down the Nile and conducts all these sacrifices, all these temple rituals, gets very involved in the Egyptian cults and celebrating, worshiping the Egyptian gods. Now, this was something that was done for generations, and yet all the historians, all the near contemporary historians, Cassius, Plutarch, they call out this trip of her going and doing all these sacrifices and doing all this religious worship, which suggests that yes, everyone else did it, but she took it to a new level, really connects with the locals, with the natives, with the Egyptians in this religious worship, all right? So she is like this populace, this queen of the common people. The common people love Cleopatra. Whereas the oligarchs, who are all Greek, they don't like her. They favor her brother and oppose her. And that's kind of how the troops break down too. Her army is full of Egyptians and then near neighbors, Nabateans, Jews, all that kind of thing. Whereas her brother's army is mostly Greek. So this part of the history is sketchy. Most of the history that we get is from Roman sources. Okay, so anytime the Romans aren't really on the scene, we don't have great information about what's happening. But somehow, Ptolemy, her brother, ends up in the palace and in control of the city of Alexandria, and then Pompey comes rowing into town. Pompey had just fought a major battle with Julius Caesar and lost. So he fled to Egypt as fast as he could, figuring that he could rely on the loyalty of the Ptolemies, to whom he had been a good friend in the past. He was one of the key figures in Rome, propping up Cleopatra's father on the throne. So Pompey thinks that he can get his feet under him in Egypt, raise another army, and continue to fight against Caesar. Well, this presents a conundrum for Cleopatra's brother Ptolemy. Yes, Pompey is an old family friend, but he appears to be on the losing side of a civil war. And if Ptolemy ends up on the wrong side of the Romans, he can say goodbye to his throne. So what does he do with Pompey, who is coming, sailing into Alexandria expecting a welcome? Well, one of Ptolemy's advisors gives him the advice, dead men don't bite. And so when Pompey comes rowing in, they disingenuously welcome him and then behead him just before reaching the shore. Caesar is hot on his heels, so he shows up in Alexandria a few days later. Ptolemy and his advisors proudly show him the head of Pompey, and he is not pleased. He breaks out into tears. Some people see a cynical calculation in this. He wanted to appear to not be celebrating the death of a fellow Roman. That would play poorly back in Rome, which is true enough. But I also think that these tears are at least somewhat genuine. They had been friends once upon a time. Pompey had even married Caesar's daughter. Caesar had always insisted that if they could just talk face to face, this entire civil war could be resolved and ended. So I do think that Caesar is legitimately grieved to see his old friend killed. The HBO series Rome has an excellent dramatization of this moment. Here it is.
Good. In that case, you should have no trouble in handing over Pompey Magnus.
I do not like his tone. You can go.
Master, do you remember what we spoke of before? Of crocodile and fox? Oh, let us show him our surprise.
All right, go on. Show him. To make him a body, and moving arms and legs, and do a mime show with real animals and everything.
Silence! Shame on the house of Ptolemies for such barbarity. Shame.
You are enemies.
He was a consul of Rome! Consul of Rome. To die in this sordid way, quartered like some low thief. Shame.
And okay, this is fictionalized, it's a dramatization, but I do think that this scene does capture very well the self-regard that Romans had for themselves and fellow citizens. Anyway, Caesar sets up camp in the Ptolemaic palace in Alexandria, and he just wants to end the civil war, settle Egypt, make sure that it is pacified and loyal before returning to finish the civil war. Now, for Cleopatra, this presents a problem. Caesar wants to end the civil war, yes, but he doesn't have most of his troops with him yet, and so he can't force the issue. He can't just force everyone to make peace. He wants Cleopatra and her brother to begin jointly ruling again, but he can't get a message to her. She can't get a message to him. There's no communication between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, and Cleopatra's fear is, for every day that goes by without contact, that is another day that Ptolemy and his advisors can share their perspective, explain why this whole war is actually Cleopatra's fault. Wouldn't it be cleaner and simpler anyway to have just one ruler? So, Julius Caesar, I know you just want to settle things, but maybe actually the best way to settle things is just to take our side and we were in control of the capital anyway. Let's just go conquer Cleopatra and be done with all this. So imagine that you are in Cleopatra's situation. You come to power as co-ruler. Now you are on the outside of your capital with an army that is composed of maybe the less well-regarded elements of society. The Romans are the dominant power. They have this unstoppable army. And the prominent man, the one who has just won this civil war, is there day after day, collaborating with, speaking with your brother who you hate, who you're fighting with, and his advisors who you hate even more. And you just have to watch from the desert as all this happens. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, as the weeks go by, it's only a matter of time until they change his mind and until I'm done. These Roman armies are going to show up and they are going to kill me and defeat my army. So what do? What is the answer in this hopeless situation? She comes up with, frankly, one of the most brilliant plans in world history. It goes down as one of the great heists ever to have been effectuated. They just stole the royal jewels from the Louvre in Paris. That pales in comparison to the heist that Cleopatra is about to pull off. So what she does is she hides and she goes upriver, up the Nile, and then hops into a cargo boat and is smuggled in all this cargo. And then she has her servants sail her up the Nile until it reaches Alexandria. At night, the boat is docked below the palace walls with only the moonlight and the distant flicker of the famous lighthouse of Alexandria illuminating it. Cleopatra then curls up in what is variously described as a rug or as some sort of sack. I think the best translators now think it was some sort of linen sack that you might carry, produce or other goods in. And so she is literally smuggled in to the presence of Julius Caesar. And this is a harrowing moment, right? If she is caught, the guards will likely kill her on the spot. They can always say afterwards that, Caesar, I know you wanted to make peace between these two siblings, but this was a misunderstanding. She was smuggled in. We didn't know it was Cleopatra. It could have been an assassin here to kill you. Caesar, mistakes happen. Sorry, she's dead. What can we do? So it's a very dangerous proposition. And I like to think that there was a moment of commitment, right? Where she's looking around and she's got these servants who are helping her, but at the end of the day, she's the queen. The buck stops with her. And so everyone's asking her, and she's kind of asking herself, all right, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to risk everything on this one moment, on this one risky scheme? And I think in every life of action, that moment of commitment comes. That moment where you burn the boats, you burn the bridges behind you, and you have to have those nerves of steel, that intestinal fortitude to say, okay, roll the dice. And Cleopatra does. So her servants carry her through the palace, walk to the palace room where Julius Caesar is working and holding court, drop the bag, and out pops none other than Cleopatra. Of course, this is the moment that I dramatized at the very beginning of the episode. They meet, discuss business, quickly conclude a peace agreement between Cleopatra and her brother, and Caesar and Cleopatra quickly begin a love affair, perhaps that very night, if you believe some sources. Cleopatra has over the years developed a reputation as a seductress, tempting these powerful men into her bed. Of course, Julius Caesar had a reputation of his own. He had multiple high-profile affairs with prominent Roman women back in Rome. Back in Rome, they joked that he was every woman's husband and every man's wife. All right, so it was actually at the time not Cleopatra, but Julius Caesar who had the reputation as a famous seducer. Okay, so it's difficult to say who seduced who. Julius Caesar was 51 years old, but still active and fit, the most powerful man in the world, and well known for his charm and charisma. Cleopatra was 21 years old, extremely charismatic herself, a charming conversationalist, and an exotic Egyptian goddess. It takes two to tango, and I think they were both interested. And so I think maybe the proper way to understand it is that the two of them seduced one another. Of course, I guess the question is, who gained the most from this type of arrangement? And the answer, as we shall shortly see, is I think they both had something very powerful to gain from it. This episode is brought to you by Gains in Bulk. I take instantized creatine by Gains in Bulk every single day. Creatine is the most tested supplement on earth, and probably any creatine is better than no creatine. But if you take normal creatine monohydrate, the creatine particles are 300 mesh, which means they're basically too big to digest properly, and they just sit in your gut. And that creates that bloated feeling that you get sometimes from creatine, that water retention. Micronized creatine is better. They're about 60 to 80 mesh, but the gold standard is instantized creatine. It is the only fully water-soluble creatine that you can find. It gives you all the benefits of creatine, muscle growth, recovery, mental clarity, without that bloat and chalkiness that you get from regular creatine monohydrate. So I love instantized creatine by Gains in Bulk. It's the only supplement that I take absolutely every day. So check them out at gainsinbulk.com and use code BEN for 20% off your purchase. Again, that is gainsinbulk.com and use code BEN. This episode is also brought to you by Founders. Founders is one of the only podcasts that I always listen to when it comes out. It's like How to Take Over the World, but for and about great founders of companies. The host, David Senra, has read hundreds of biographies at this point, and he is just so good at teasing out common lessons from the greatest to ever do it. He recently did an episode on how Elon Musk works, and it was just fantastic. If you are or aspire to be a founder, you have to check him out. So go check it out. That is Founders, wherever you get your podcasts. But first, Caesar's presence sparks a second civil war in Alexandria. This time, it is Ptolemy who leaves and gathers an army, and it is Caesar and Cleopatra who are besieged in the palace complex with the few Roman soldiers that Caesar has brought with him, plus a few local allies show up with just enough troops to hold off disaster. There are riots in Alexandria. They build enormous siege engines to try and get over the walls of this palace complex. Common people pelt Roman soldiers with bricks and stones. They dig into the water table so that it mixes with seawater and makes it undrinkable. Caesar and Cleopatra really are on the verge of defeat. And for quite a long time, for weeks, they are cooped up in this one little quarter of the city. Eventually, Roman reinforcements do arrive, and Caesar and Cleopatra are victorious. Okay, so Cleopatra and Caesar, they are by this point lovers. They are also allied to one another. And the immediate wake of this victory would prove to be one of the most controversial periods of Julius Caesar's life. Because he is known for lightning quick action, for always staying on the move. He was someone who was always focused. And that was good because there was much that required his attention at this very moment. In the wake of this civil war, there was chaos throughout the Roman territories. There were still rebellious Roman armies in Spain and Africa. Many of their client kingdoms had been weakened, sometimes their leaders killed. New leaders needed to be installed and others confirmed in their place. Back in Rome, Caesar's lieutenants that were governing were doing so very incompetently, and the city was in disarray. And in the midst of all this, all this needs what? It needs the direction and decision of Julius Caesar. But no one knows what is happening with Julius Caesar or if he's even alive. For months, he was trapped in this palace in Alexandria with no way to send word. And so many people, many Romans, many of their clients, thought him dead or close to death. So Rome needs Caesar to assert his presence, to go show himself throughout their domains, to settle matters, to govern. And yet, at the end of the civil war, that is not what he does. He lingers in Egypt. He seemed to be on vacation. He dined and conversed with Cleopatra. He enjoyed the nightlife of Alexandria. He took a pleasure cruise up the Nile in this beautiful pleasure barge. It was 300 feet long and 80 feet high, complete with dining rooms and private quarters. It's like the classical version of a yacht. And during all of this, Cleopatra is pregnant with his child, and they are showing themselves to Egypt like they are a god and goddess, a king and queen. To many, Caesar seems bewitched by this young queen. For the first time in his life, Caesar forgets his duty. The beautiful and vivacious Cleopatra was so charming that even the immortal Caesar himself, the most driven man in the world, finally took his eye off the ball. However, it was probably a bit more complicated than that. For Cleopatra's part, it's maybe a little easier to understand, right? Why she would be doing this. Because for her, it does not hurt to have an ally in the most powerful nation in the world. The Romans control everything. She maintains her throne by the goodwill of the Romans. If they ever decide, hey, we don't want Cleopatra on the throne, then she's gone. So for her to take Julius Caesar, the most powerful Roman, the man who's going to go back and completely control the Roman state, basically rule as a monarch, to have him as her consort, to have a child with him, that makes a lot of sense. Not only that, but thinking in the long term, okay? If you're Cleopatra and you're thinking, okay, I've survived this moment. Okay, my brother is dead. He dies in this battle. I have no challengers to the throne. However, how long can this situation go on? How long are the Romans going to say, yeah, it's fine with Cleopatra and her descendants sitting on this throne? They basically got their gun to the Egyptians' head, and they keep saying, no, we're not going to pull the trigger. It's fine. We'll let you guys continue to rule. But is that really going to last for hundreds of years? Is every single Roman consul or emperor or governor, every Roman Senate going to say that this situation is okay? Are they never, not even once, going to say, actually, you know what? Let's just take Egypt, because they can whenever they want to. However, by having a child with Julius Caesar, she's creating this fusion between the Ptolemies and the Romans. Her child who comes into the world is going to be half Ptolemaic and have all that legitimacy of the Greeks and these old dynasties and kingdoms, Alexander the Great. He's a partaker of that legacy, but he's also going to be Roman. All right. So I think most people understand why this is beneficial for Cleopatra. What is more perplexing is Julius Caesar. Why is he doing this? Is he really just besotted? Is he just smitten with this young, vivacious woman? That's what many people think. However, I do think that there is a good explanation for why Julius Caesar does what he does. For one thing, Caesar needed Egypt to be stable and under his control. It was the breadbasket of the Roman Imperium. It was also the money spigot. It was the key to the entire Eastern Mediterranean, to Greece, Syria, Judea, Nabatea, all of Turkey, Anatolia. So he needed to ensure that Cleopatra, his ally, was secure on the throne, that he wouldn't need to return and intervene again. He needed Egypt to be an asset, contributing money and supplies to his war cause, and not a liability, taking time and resources and men to pacify over and over again. Because at this point, it has been a liability, right? He has to bring his troops down to Egypt to subdue it and make sure Cleopatra is steady on the throne. All right, so he says, I can't have this anymore. It can't be a liability. It needs to become an asset. And by sailing with Cleopatra down the Nile, by letting her be seen side by side with the most powerful man in the world, he's helping to secure her rule. Anyone who's thinking of challenging her, the message is, hey, this woman is backed by Roman power. You better not try anything. The other strategic consideration was Cleopatra's pregnancy. Okay, so to explain why this is so important and such a bombshell, we need to back up a little bit. Rome was entering unprecedented territory. Julius Caesar was, in everything but name, a monarch. And the rule of someone like Caesar was inevitable. Previously, Rome was a republic, and we bestow all sorts of associations on that word, right? Republics are civilized, modern, liberal, democratic. They respect the rule of law. They are orderly. But in truth, the Roman Republic was not like that at all. It is actually best thought of as a sort of pirate's den. We'll all go out and raid and conquer the world, and then when we return home with all this booty, we'll share power, we'll divide it up, because all of us are dangerous men and we don't want to fight amongst ourselves. We want to conserve our power for conquest of the outside world. That was the basic logic of the Roman Republic. But that sort of arrangement does not work well with a large, complex bureaucracy administering infrastructure, justice, taxation, military affairs across 3 continents, right? You need a CEO. So on the one hand, I think Caesar can see that. Rome can't go back to the way it was. It will always have someone in charge at the top now. But 2 problems with that. 1, he doesn't have a direct male heir to pass his kingdom to. And second, Rome has very strong anti-monarchical sympathies. The Romans are just never going to go for an actual monarchy like the Ptolemies enjoy. He's going to need to have a republican fig leaf at the very least. And a union with Cleopatra and a child with her solves all of this. The son can inherit Egypt as a private kingdom, and who knows, maybe he can even expand that kingdom to include more territory, more wealth, more power. And then he can use all of that money and prestige and all of his power base in Egypt to continue to hold power in Rome under republican pretenses. Presumably, they just keep reelecting him as consul or dictator, or, the office of imperator, emperor has not been invented yet, but something like that, right? I think Caesar probably realizes that new titles can be invented. So I guess the analogy for this is, right now, there is anxiety in Trump world about the succession after Trump. That's why some people are floating him running for a 3rd term. But let's just say that in some bizarro world, Trump is much younger and he marries Steve Jobs' only surviving daughter. And also in this bizarro world, Steve Jobs owns Apple 100% outright. Okay. I know this is kind of a crazy scenario, but I actually think it's a pretty good analogy. As long as that kid isn't a complete idiot, he is going to be able to use his father's political legacy and his mother's wealth and company, Apple, to stay in power forever, right? He doesn't have to become a military dictator because he can just keep buying elections. That is, in broad strokes, the possibility presented by a union between Caesar and Cleopatra. I say a union and not a marriage because Caesar is technically married. Cleopatra was not married. Well, she had been previously to her brother, but he dies during the Civil War, ostensibly. We'll actually talk about that in episode 2. Maybe he didn't die. But anyway, a union with Cleopatra is not a marriage. But nevertheless, I think there is an idea that, okay, we can still legitimize this child to some degree. So a union with Cleopatra solves everything for Caesar. And it solves everything for Cleopatra, right? So for both of them, this is a very advantageous relationship. So in that context, I think that Caesar taking months with Cleopatra, making sure she is secure on her throne, making sure Egypt is pacified, and making sure that she is pregnant is a rational decision. And obviously, it's a very rational decision. That is not to say that there isn't love in the mix. Human considerations come into all of these things. I think when we try and analyze it on a purely strategic level, that is just not how life is. And it seems clear to me that Cleopatra and Caesar really did enjoy one another. And like, is it possible that Caesar was smitten with Cleopatra? I think it's not only possible, but likely. All of our contemporary sources say that she was charming. They don't say that she was particularly beautiful. So actually, let's talk about the history of the beauty of Cleopatra, because at first, she's the woman who seduces Julius Caesar and gets him to forget his duty, right? That's the line, at least initially. And she does the same thing later with Marc Antony, which we'll hear more about. And so at first, there is this reputation of Cleopatra as a seductress. And that naturally lends itself to the reputation of Cleopatra as a great beauty. All right. So over the years, she gets this reputation as a great beauty until you get Elizabeth Taylor playing her, right, in the movie. And so you have this idea of Cleopatra as this stunning beauty. Now, as it turns out, that was not the case. And all the contemporary sources, none of them say that she was a great beauty. And so you get this like 180-degree reversal. And sometimes I think what you hear now on podcasts and books is that actually Cleopatra was ugly. And it was just her charm that seduced Julius Caesar. However, we actually have a lot of images of her. Not a lot, but we have a few. And actually, if you look at them, they're all similar. I mean, it appears that they're actually good likenesses because there's a statue head and there's a painting and there's a coin. And if you look at all three of them, like you can start to triangulate from all three of them. Oh yeah, I actually think this is what Cleopatra probably looked like. She's got this very prominent nose, this very prominent chin, and she's not ugly, I don't think. I mean, she can perhaps be described as handsome. It is, I think, maybe a slightly more masculine face. I think on balance, Cleopatra, good enough looking woman. That is not what she relied on was her looks, though. All of the ancient sources agree. She was extremely witty, a great conversationalist, very charismatic. And so it was the combination of good enough looks and this tremendous personality that manages to seduce Julius Caesar. Not only that, but he was taken in by Alexandria, by the life of an Eastern god king, right? Alexandria was the metropolis of its day. And Caesar was a very curious person. He would have loved hearing from and conversing with the philosophers, studying the scrolls in the Library of Alexandria, seeing the exotic animals, talking and spending nights with a powerful and charming young lover who is considered a pharaohess and a goddess as well as a queen. Like, it sounds like the life. And I think that Cleopatra, she was a wonderful host. Again, the ancient sources talk about these extravagant parties that she throws. So I think that Alexandrian life would have been naturally alluring to Julius Caesar, and Cleopatra is doing everything that she can to make sure that it is enticing to Julius Caesar. Okay, so all of this speaks to the charm of Cleopatra. Again, both of them have an interest in this relationship, in this union, but I do think that it is a good solution for Julius Caesar, but it is absolutely necessary for Cleopatra. Okay. So she does have probably slightly more to gain from it, and therefore I think maybe gets more of the credit for having pulled off this coup, essentially. And that is what it is. So Caesar arrives in September of 46 BC, when Cleopatra is 21 years old. This whole siege situation takes about 6 months, and then he lingers in Egypt for maybe a month or two and ends up leaving in April of 47 BC. As soon as he leaves, Cleopatra begins proscriptions and reprisals against her enemies. I mentioned that she is something of a populist. She is essentially a leader of a high-low alliance, supported by native Egyptian peasantry, which appreciates her speaking their language, respecting their traditions, promoting their leaders and their religion, and also supported by the Romans at the top. She is opposed by the Greek oligarchs who typically pulled the strings behind the scenes. They are, by and large, wealthy merchants and bureaucrats. And here's the thing about being the populist leader. The people, the people, capital T, capital P, the people are a very powerful tool. If you can get the people behind you, the common man, then the sky is the limit. Because you've got all this manpower, there's all this latent power. They have trouble coordinating, but if you can coordinate them, that is rocket fuel. But if you try and get the people behind you, you win or you die. The oligarchs will never forgive you. People power is unbelievably potent, but also unbelievably dangerous. And so if you do use the people to rise to power, you have to defeat your enemies completely. And Cleopatra knows this. And so as soon as Caesar leaves, she begins a series of purges and proscriptions. She kills wealthy enemies, steals their estates, purges rival bureaucrats and advisors from the government, state seizures of businesses that are owned by rivals, all that sort of thing, right? As Machiavelli says, men ought either to be well treated or crushed, for if they are spared, they will be vengeful, whereas if they be crushed, they will be unable to injure you. All right. Cleopatra is a great strategist from that perspective. Okay, she can see this. She can see, okay, there is no making peace with all these Greek oligarchs. They hate me. They have seen me use people power, use the people to come to power, and there can be no peace with these people. She wipes them out completely as soon as Julius Caesar leaves. And it's really she doesn't have much trouble from that quarter ever again. So her son is born in June of that year, meaning, again, she's probably pregnant within the first month of Caesar arriving. Cleopatra is not exactly shy about this child's parentage, naming him Ptolemy Caesar, though most people refer to him simply as Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. If you want to take over the world, it often helps to work in silence. You don't need anyone to know what you're up to. Imagine if every payment Cleopatra made to Roman senators to secure the friendship of Rome was visible to the public, or even to the banks and bureaucrats in Rome. That's why this episode is sponsored by Zcash. Zcash is unstoppable private money. It's encrypted Bitcoin, giving you the freedom to transact without surveillance, without debasement, and without permission. It's the machinery of freedom, money that lets builders build and dreamers dream, even when states decay. If you want a future of infinite frontiers, if you crave freedom, you need money that resists control. You need Zcash. Some are saying that privacy might be the last 1000x in crypto because seen wealth is seizable wealth. So if you are interested in getting started with Zcash and having truly private money, then download Zashi Wallet from your app store. That is Zashi, Z-A-S-H-I wallet. Again, you can get that wherever you download your apps. The next year, Cleopatra comes to Rome and stays with Caesar in his villa. And this is something of a PR disaster for Cleopatra, again, at least as popularly understood, because an Alexandrian woman can get away with making a splash, or at least a Ptolemy can. Right? Alexandria was far less patriarchal than Rome. Women could own property and businesses, could inherit property, and Ptolemaic queens were quite common. Whereas the ideal Roman woman was one whose influence was felt only behind the scenes, right? She was there to embody Roman virtue, to support her husband, to be a pleasant companion and conversationalist at dinners, and raise strong sons. And that was it. Roman women were not supposed to draw attention to themselves. So Cleopatra's whole MO is to draw attention to herself, right? To make herself a spectacle. That's how she came to power. I mean, that is what worked for her in Alexandria. That does not go over well in Rome. She's like the first Kardashian in Rome. She is at once loved and hated. Like, on the one hand, people are very scandalized by Cleopatra. They can't believe it. They gossip about her. She's the talk of the town in a bad way. And people make political hay over this, right? They attack Caesar for it. They attack her for it. But it's not all bad, right? She is a Kardashian. And the Kardashians are similarly like kind of reviled and feared. But also, they're enormously wealthy and they're celebrated and loved and followed, right? And Cleopatra is the same. She's a very in-demand dinner guest. Her hairstyle becomes the dominant fashion in Rome. I mean, she is a celebrity. People want to be her. Women want to be her. Men want to sleep with her. She is the consort of the most powerful man in Rome, Julius Caesar, who is, also an icon, right? He's not just a powerful general, but he's like a fashion icon, right? He was the man who popularized a new form of loose-fitting robe with a loose-skirt belt and all this stuff, right? So they are this very controversial but aspirational couple. And Caesar does not help the situation. He has a golden statue of Cleopatra erected in the Temple of Venus, which makes sense, right? Venus is the Roman equivalent of Isis, who is the goddess that Cleopatra considers herself. But still, to make a golden idol of your mistress is very bad form. And this is the Temple of Venus. Venus is the mother of the Romans, right? Through her son Aeneas, who supposedly comes from Troy. But so Venus is mother goddess to the Romans. and Julius Caesar is saying that Cleopatra is her and sets up a golden idol of her in the Romans, one of their main temples, right? So I have trouble believing that Cleopatra and Caesar were completely blindsided by this reaction. Especially Caesar must have known this was coming. He has grown up his entire life in Rome. But I think if this bold scheme is going to work, this joint union of East and West via Caesar and Cleopatra, then the Roman people have to be habituated to this new normal. And they do take it slow on some level, right? Cleopatra openly acknowledges Caesarion's parentage, but Caesar maintains tactful silence on the matter. He never denies that Caesarion is his son, but he doesn't say anything about it, right? He doesn't say, no, this is my son, and start shoving it in everyone's face. He doesn't rub people's noses in it. Over the next year and a half, Cleopatra continues to make visits to Rome, and she is present in Rome when Julius Caesar is assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BC. At first, Cleopatra remains in Rome to hear Caesar's will opened and to see if Caesarion is perhaps made his heir. But he's not. Caesar, of course, names his grandnephew Octavian as his heir instead. This is actually probably a mercy to Caesarion. The Romans would likely not have permitted a one-year-old foreigner to inherit Caesar's estate. And in fact, it would have put a target on his young forehead. I think Caesarion would have been dead within the year if he had been named Caesar's heir. And so in mid-44 BC, Cleopatra headed back to Egypt with her grand plans in tatters. She was back to square one. As biographer Stacy Schiff puts it, she had played the game cannily and correctly, more effectively than any Ptolemy before her, only to find herself back at square one, blindsided by events, sabotaged by a wholesale revision of the rules. As a near contemporary marveled, who can adequately express her astonishment at the changes of fortune and the mysterious vicissitudes in human affairs? She would need to find a new way to secure a future for herself and her children, which she would manage in grand fashion, but we will save that for episode 2. For now, let's recap and discuss takeaways. So, Cleopatra is a Ptolemy. She ascends to the throne as a teenager, becomes embroiled in a civil war, strikes up a love affair with Julius Caesar, becomes pregnant with his child, wins the civil war, gives birth to the child, secures her reign, begins a public relations campaign in Rome before her lover and protector is murdered, and she must now return to Egypt and find a new way forward. In episode 2, we will hear how she takes a new lover and once again embarks on the project of uniting Rome and the Greek East before tragically losing everything. Or does she? Find out in episode 2, which will be releasing on Friday, unless you are a premium subscriber, in which case you can listen to it right now, along with the endnote section of episode 2. So if you're a premium subscriber, you can listen to part 2 right now, along with the endnotes. If you are a free subscriber, part 2 will be coming out on Friday and endnotes will be unavailable to you. If you'd like to subscribe, you can go to takeoverpod.supercast.com, or if you are listening in Apple Podcasts, you can subscribe right in app. But before we go, let's discuss some takeaways from episode 1. The first is the idea of a moment of commitment, what Rudyard Kipling calls risking it all on one turn of pitch and toss. There comes that moment when, through bold action, you can give yourself a chance at achieving everything you have ever wanted. Will you have the courage, like Cleopatra, to take great risk, or will you let it slip away? The second takeaway is the idea of people power. There is great potency in using people power to your advantage, but you have to be prepared to go all the way to win a total victory, because those you unseat will never rest until you are defeated. Cleopatra did what Caesar would not. Both came to power using populism, the support of the people, capital T, capital P. Cleopatra prescribed and purged her enemies. She completely destroyed the opposition, and they therefore had no power to take revenge on her. Caesar forgave his enemies and tried to move forward with them, and they assassinated him for it. Okay? So, if you are a populist and you come to power using people power, remember that you have to win completely. You have to wipe out your enemies, or else they're going to take revenge on you. Third is the power of charm. Cleopatra got where she did because she was an excellent conversationalist and she had exceptional wit. Persuasion is its own form of power, one that Cleopatra utilized to a phenomenal degree. She did that through her personal conversation, her personal comportment, her manners, but also using the assets that life had given her. She enticed Julius Caesar not just with her own person and the personal relationship they had, but with the idea of Alexandria, of Julius Caesar, you're too smart to just be confined to that backwater Rome. Don't you belong here? Don't you love the theater and the philosophy and the history that is present in Alexandria? And so wrapping all of that up into what has been described through the generations as Cleopatra's charm was one of her most powerful tools. All right, we'll leave it there. If you are a premium subscriber, I will see you right now on episode 2. And if not, thank you for listening to How to Take Over the World. This episode was also brought to you by Speechify. I use Speechify for this episode to do my reading and research. Speechify turns anything into a podcast. I find that when I read and listen at the same time, I both get through material faster and have higher retention. So if you are someone who wants to learn more and learn faster, then Speechify is for you. Give it a try at Speechify.com and use code BEN for 15% off Speechify Premium. Again, that is Speechify.com.